You ever watch a child playing hide and seek who thinks that if they can't see you, you can't see them either? They cover their eyes and genuinely believe they've become invisible. You probably smiled at the memory, maybe even felt a warm nostalgia wash over you. But what if I told you that this seemingly innocent childhood quirk holds the key to understanding one of the most dangerous cognitive traps that adults fall into every single day? What if I told you that this exact pattern of thinking, this pre-operational logic that Jean Piaget documented in thousands of children, is the same mechanism that causes intelligent adults to walk straight into emotional ambushes, professional disasters, and relationship catastrophes without ever seeing them coming? You're sitting there right now, confident in your ability to think logically, to see situations clearly, to anticipate problems before they hit you. But here's what Jean Piaget discovered that will fundamentally shake everything you believe about your own thinking. The cognitive structures you built in childhood are still running your adult decision-making process, and most of the time you have absolutely no idea it's happening. The weight of this hits differently when you realize how many critical decisions you've made in the last month alone. That argument with your partner where you were absolutely certain they were attacking you when they were actually trying to help. That business opportunity you dismissed because it didn't fit your mental model of how success should look. That pattern you keep repeating in relationships, expecting different results but getting the same painful outcome every single time. You feel it in your chest, don't you? That uncomfortable recognition that maybe, just maybe, you're not seeing the full picture. Maybe your thinking isn't as clear and logical as you believed, and the frustration builds because you're trying so hard. You're doing your best. You're using all the intelligence you have, but something keeps going wrong. The same mistakes, the different faces, but the same story. And you're exhausted from it. You're tired of feeling blindsided by situations you should have seen coming. You're weary of that sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize too late that you completely misread the situation. Here's what makes this even more maddening. Everyone around you seems to be operating with the same flawed logic, so you never get the feedback you need to correct it. It's like an entire society of people playing hide and seek with their eyes covered, all agreeing that yes, we really are invisible, while the consequences of our collective blindness pile up around us. Your career stalls because you can't see the political dynamics at play. Your relationships crumble because you're perceiving attacks where none exist. Your financial decisions backfire because you're thinking in rigid categories instead of flexible possibilities. And through it all, you maintain this absolute certainty that your perception is accurate, your logic is sound, your understanding is complete. But Jean Piaget's most revolutionary discovery wasn't about children at all. It was about you. It was about the hidden architecture of human thought, the invisible scaffolding that determines not just what you think, but how you're capable of thinking. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how a farm boy in rural Switzerland used pre-operational logic to predict an ambush that would have killed him, how Piaget documented this case and hundreds like it, and most importantly, how understanding these cognitive stages will give you the power to finally see the ambushes coming in your own life, before they destroy everything you've built. Jean Piaget didn't set out to revolutionize psychology. He started his career studying mollusks of all things, meticulously documenting the tiny variations in shell patterns with the precision of a jeweler examining diamonds. But in 1920, he took a position in Paris at the laboratory of Alfred Binet, where he was tasked with standardizing intelligence tests for children. It was supposed to be routine work, mechanical even. Score the tests, record the data, move on to the next child. But Piaget couldn't move on. He became obsessed not with the questions children answered correctly, but with the ones they got wrong. More specifically, he became fascinated by the fact that children of the same age made the same types of errors. It wasn't random. It wasn't lack of intelligence, it was systematic, patterned, predictable. These children were operating with a completely different logic system than adults, and nobody had really noticed it before. One case in particular haunted him. A 7-year-old boy from a farming family outside Geneva. The boy's father had brought him to Piaget's attention because of something remarkable that had happened the previous summer. The family raised dairy cows, and they had been having trouble with a predator, possibly a wolf or large dog, that had been attacking the calves at night. The father had tried everything, reinforcing fences, setting traps, staying up on watch. Nothing worked. The attacks continued, always in a different section of the pasture, always unpredictable. The father was facing financial ruin. Then his 7-year-old son, this farm boy who had never attended formal school, told his father exactly where the next attack would happen. Not just a vague area, but the specific corner of the specific pasture. The father, desperate and out of options, decided to humor the child. He set up his watch in that exact location. And the boy was right. The predator came exactly where the child said it would, and the father finally stopped the attacks. When Piaget interviewed this boy, he expected to find some kind of logical analysis. Perhaps the child had noticed tracks or patterns in the timing, or some detail the adults had missed. But what he discovered was far more interesting and far more disturbing. The boy explained his prediction using what Piaget would later term pre-operational logic. The child said, "The bad animal lives in the dark forest on the east side. He comes out when he's hungry. He already ate the calves on this side and this side, so he'll come to this side next because that's where the food is that he hasn't eaten yet." On the surface, this sounds almost logical, but listen to what the child is actually saying. He's attributing intention and planning to the predator. He already ate these, so he'll come here next. He's thinking of the pasture sections as discrete units that get used up like items on a checklist. He's centering the entire scenario around the predator's perspective, imagining its thoughts and decisions. This is classic pre-operational thinking, animism, treating living things as if they have human-like reasoning. Centration, focusing on one aspect and ignoring others. Egocentrism, projecting mental states onto external entities. The shocking part? The child was right. His pre-operational logic happened to align with reality in this specific instance. But here's what Piaget realized that changed everything. Being right doesn't mean your thinking is correct. The child couldn't explain why his logic worked. He couldn't apply the same reasoning to other situations. When Piaget asked him to predict where a different type of animal might go, the boy's logic completely fell apart. He was operating with a cognitive structure that happened to produce a correct answer in one narrow context, but couldn't generalize or adapt. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for us as adults. How many times have you been right for the wrong reasons? How many times has your gut instinct paid off, reinforcing a pattern of thinking that is fundamentally flawed but occasionally produces good outcomes? You start to trust that instinct. You build your identity around it. You tell yourself you have good intuition, strong judgment, reliable perception. But you're that farm boy using pre-operational logic and getting lucky, never developing the cognitive structures that would actually serve you consistently. Piaget spent the next 60 years of his life documenting exactly how thinking develops, how cognitive structures build upon each other, and most critically for you right now, how adults can remain stuck in earlier stages without ever realizing it. He identified 4 major stages, but here's what nobody tells you. These stages aren't age-based milestones that everyone automatically reaches. They're potential structures that only develop if the right conditions are met. You can be 40 years old with a graduate degree and still be operating with concrete operational thinking in your relationships, or formal operational thinking in your career but pre-operational thinking in your emotional life. Your cognition isn't uniform. You're a patchwork of different developmental levels in different domains, and the areas where you're stuck in earlier stages are exactly where the ambushes keep hitting you. Now, I want to pause here for a moment because something important is happening as you listen to this. You're probably already thinking about areas of your life where you feel stuck, where the same patterns keep repeating, where you keep getting blindsided despite your best efforts. And here's what I need you to understand. That recognition, that discomfort you're feeling right now, that's not a sign that something's wrong with you. It's a sign that something's finally right. It's the first stirring of formal operational thinking looking at itself, becoming aware of its own cognitive structures. That's metacognition, and it's rare and precious and the beginning of everything changing. So here's what I want to ask you, and I really want you to think about this. What's the ambush you didn't see coming that hurt you the most? Maybe it was a relationship that seemed perfect until it suddenly wasn't. Maybe it was a career opportunity that turned into a nightmare. Maybe it was a friendship that imploded, and you still don't understand why. Drop a comment right now and just write, "I didn't see it coming." That's it. Just that simple phrase. Because here's what you need to know. Your willingness to acknowledge the ambushes you've already taken is the first step toward developing the cognitive structures that will help you see the next ones before they hit. And more than that, when you share your experience, you're helping someone else in this community feel less alone in their confusion. Someone else is reading comments right now, feeling like they're the only one who keeps missing the obvious signs, and your simple acknowledgement that you've been there too might be exactly what gives them permission to start looking at their own thinking differently. You have more power to help others than you realize. So go ahead, take 10 seconds, scroll down and just type, "I didn't see it coming." I'll wait, because what we're about to explore next is going to make so much more sense once you've anchored it to a real experience from your own life. The first stage Piaget identified, the sensoromotor stage, runs from birth to about 2 years old. This is where infants learn object permanence, the understanding that things continue to exist even when you can't see them. Before this develops, when you hide a toy under a blanket, the baby genuinely believes the toy has ceased to exist. It's not that they forget about it or lose interest. In their cognitive reality, the toy is gone. This seems completely foreign to you as an adult, until you realize how often you do the exact same thing with abstract concepts. That friend who stopped calling, they've ceased to exist in your emotional reality. You don't maintain a mental model of them continuing to have thoughts, feelings, struggles, a life that exists independent of your interaction with them. When they're not in front of you, they're gone. Then they resurface months later, and you feel ambushed by their struggles or their changed circumstances, because in your cognitive model, they were frozen in time, not continuing to develop and change. The pre-operational stage, from roughly 2 to 7 years old, is where that farm boy was operating. This is characterized by symbolic thinking, the ability to use words and images to represent objects but with severe limitations. Egocentrism dominates this stage. The child genuinely cannot take another person's perspective. Piaget's famous 3 mountains task demonstrated this beautifully. He would show children a model of 3 mountains from their viewpoint, then ask them to select a picture showing what the mountains looked like from a doll's viewpoint on the other side of the table. Pre-operational children consistently chose the picture matching their own view. They couldn't mentally rotate the perspective. They couldn't imagine seeing from a position they weren't physically occupying. Now, before you dismiss this as childish thinking you've long outgrown, ask yourself, when was the last time you were absolutely certain someone was being unreasonable, only to discover later that from their position with their information, their perspective made perfect sense? You were trapped in egocentrism. You couldn't rotate your mental model to see from their viewpoint. The ambush came when their actions, which seemed random or hostile from your perspective, turned out to be completely rational from theirs. Centration is another hallmark of pre-operational thinking. The child focuses on one perceptible aspect of a situation and ignores all others. Piaget's conservation tasks revealed this starkly. Pour water from a short, wide glass into a tall, narrow glass in front of a pre-operational child, and they'll tell you the tall glass now has more water. They're centering on the height dimension and ignoring width. They can't decentrate, can't hold multiple dimensions in mind simultaneously and understand the relationship between them. You do this constantly in your adult life. You focus on what someone said and ignore how they said it. You focus on the immediate cost and ignore the long-term value. You focus on the problem right in front of you and ignore the system that keeps generating that problem. Then you feel ambushed when the dimension you ignored turns out to be the critical one. Irreversibility is the third major limitation of pre-operational thinking. The child cannot mentally reverse a sequence of events or operations. If you show them a ball of clay, then roll it into a snake shape, they can't mentally reverse that process to understand it's still the same amount of clay. They see the transformation as one-directional and permanent. In your life, this shows up as the inability to work backwards from outcomes to causes. Something bad happened, and you can't reverse engineer the chain of events that led there. You can't imagine the alternate paths you might have taken. You're stuck in forward-only thinking, which means you keep repeating the same patterns, because you can't mentally simulate different approaches. The ambushes keep coming because you can't learn from them in a way that actually changes your future behavior. The concrete operational stage, roughly 7 to 11 years old, brings enormous cognitive leaps. Suddenly, the child can conserve, understanding that quantity remains the same despite changes in appearance. They can decentrate, holding multiple dimensions of a problem in mind simultaneously. They can reverse operations mentally. They can classify objects into categories and understand class inclusion, that something can belong to multiple categories at once. They can seriate, organizing objects in order along a quantitative dimension. But here's the limitation that keeps adults stuck. Concrete operational thinking only works with tangible, observable objects and events. The child at this stage can solve logical problems about things they can see, touch, manipulate. But ask them to reason about abstract concepts, hypothetical situations, or their own thinking processes, and they hit a wall. Most adults never fully develop beyond concrete operational thinking in significant areas of their lives. You can execute complex professional tasks that involve tangible procedures and observable outcomes. You can manage your finances in terms of concrete money in and money out. You can navigate social situations using concrete rules you've learned. But ask yourself to think abstractly about the principles underlying your relationship patterns and you draw a blank. Ask yourself to reason hypothetically about how your life might be different if you changed fundamental assumptions, and you can't do it. Ask yourself to examine your own cognitive processes, to think about your thinking, and it feels like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. This is where you're vulnerable. The ambushes that keep hitting you are operating at an abstract, systemic level that your concrete operational thinking simply cannot process. You keep trying to solve abstract problems with concrete solutions, and it doesn't work, and you don't understand why, and the frustration builds and builds. The formal operational stage, which Piaget believed emerged around 11 or 12 but which many adults never fully develop, is where everything changes. This is the capacity for abstract thought, hypothetical reasoning, systematic problem-solving, and metacognition. You can think about concepts that have no physical referent. You can reason from premises to conclusions without needing concrete examples. You can generate multiple hypotheses and test them systematically. You can think about your own thinking, examining and modifying your cognitive processes. Most critically, you can see patterns across disparate situations, identifying the underlying principles that connect them. This is the cognitive structure that finally lets you see the ambushes coming. Because you're not just reacting to concrete events anymore. You're seeing the abstract patterns that generate those events. Piaget documented case after case of the transition between these stages, and one in particular illuminates exactly what we're talking about. A 9-year-old girl was asked, "If all gorps are Zims, and this thing is a gorp, is it a Zim?" She couldn't answer. She kept saying, "But what's a gorp? I don't know what a Zim is." She needed concrete reference. She couldn't reason from abstract premises. The same girl at 13 could immediately answer, "Yes, it has to be a Zim, because the first statement says all gorps are Zims." That's the leap. That's the cognitive structure you need to predict ambushes in your life. Because here's what an ambush actually is. It's a predictable outcome of an abstract pattern that you couldn't see because you were thinking concretely. The relationship falls apart not because of the specific argument you had, but because of an underlying compatibility problem you couldn't think about abstractly. The business fails not because of the immediate cash flow crisis, but because of systemic issues in your business model you couldn't conceptualize. The friendship implodes not because of what they said at that party, but because of incompatible values and needs you couldn't abstract from the concrete interactions. There are different types of cognitive limitations that keep you vulnerable, and recognizing which type you're dealing with is the first step toward development. Type 1 is domain-specific arrest. You've developed formal operational thinking in some areas, concrete in others, pre-operational in still others. The brilliant engineer who can reason abstractly about complex systems but thinks like a pre-operational child about emotions. The therapist who can navigate the depths of human psychology but can't think systematically about money. Your cognitive development is uneven, and the arrested areas are where the ambushes land. Type 2 is structure-resistant rigidity. You've built concrete operational structures that work well enough that you never felt the need to develop formal operations. You've got rules, procedures, heuristics that generally produce okay outcomes. But they're brittle. When the situation changes in ways your concrete rules can't handle, you shatter. The ambush comes when your reliable approaches suddenly stop working and you have no abstract understanding of why they ever worked in the first place. Type 3 is metacognitive blindness. You might have formal operational capacity, but you never turn it on yourself. You can think abstractly about external problems, but not about your own thinking. So you keep using the same cognitive approaches over and over, never examining whether they're serving you, never developing new ways of thinking. The ambushes keep coming from inside your own mind. The development from one stage to the next isn't automatic or age-based. Piaget identified 4 factors necessary for cognitive development. First, maturation. Neurological development that creates the biological capacity for new cognitive structures. Second, physical experience. Direct interaction with objects and events that reveals their properties. Third, social interaction. Encountering perspectives different from your own that create cognitive conflict and force restructuring. Fourth, and most important, equilibration. The self-regulatory process by which you restore balance after your existing cognitive structures prove inadequate. That last one is where most people get stuck. Equilibration requires that you notice when your thinking isn't working, that you tolerate the disequilibrium long enough to build new structures, that you don't just retreat to your familiar patterns. Most people, when they encounter a situation their current thinking can't handle, don't develop new cognitive structures. They just decide the situation is impossible, or unfair, or someone else's fault. They restore equilibrium by changing their perception of the problem, not by changing their thinking, and so they stay stuck. And the ambushes keep coming. Piaget documented the dangers of arrested development through hundreds of case studies. There was the adolescent boy who could ace every math test but couldn't understand why his friendships kept failing. He was treating social relationships like concrete operations, applying rigid rules. If I do X, they should respond with Y. When people responded with Z instead, he felt betrayed and confused, not recognizing that human relationships require formal operational thinking about abstract concepts like needs, values, contexts, motivations. There was the adult woman who kept choosing the same type of romantic partner, each relationship ending the same painful way. She would list the concrete traits. This one is different. He has dark hair instead of light. He works in finance instead of tech. But she couldn't think abstractly about the underlying pattern, the emotional unavailability or narcissistic tendencies that transcended the surface differences. Her concrete operational thinking kept her trapped in a loop she intellectually knew was destructive, but couldn't escape, because escape required a level of abstraction she hadn't developed. There was the business executive who could manage day-to-day operations brilliantly, but couldn't anticipate market shifts. He was operating with concrete operational thinking about his industry. We do A, B, and C, and that produces results. He couldn't think formally about the abstract principles of market dynamics, couldn't reason hypothetically about what might happen if underlying conditions changed. When the market shifted, he felt ambushed, never understanding that the ambush was entirely predictable for someone thinking at a formal operational level. The process of integrating across stages isn't linear or simple. Piaget described it as a spiral, where you revisit earlier structures at higher levels of organization, but in practice for most people, it's more like archaeological layers. Your earliest cognitive structures are still there, still active, still influencing you. Pre-operational thinking doesn't disappear when you develop concrete operations. It just gets overlaid. And under stress, under threat, under conditions of uncertainty, you regress to earlier structures. The formal operational thinker who becomes egocentric and centrated when their partner criticizes them. The concrete operational professional who starts thinking magically, using pre-operational animism when facing a health crisis. Your development is fragile and context-dependent, and the ambushes often come when stress pushes you back into earlier stages, right when you most need your highest cognitive capacities. Piaget's integration process, the method he developed for helping people develop more sophisticated cognitive structures, had specific phases. Phase 1 is recognizing your current structure. You can't develop beyond where you are if you don't know where you are. This requires brutal honesty about how you actually think, not how you believe you think or wish you thought. When you make decisions, are you really considering multiple perspectives, or just your own with superficial adjustments? When you face problems, are you really thinking abstractly about underlying principles or just applying concrete rules you've learned? Most people skip this phase, assuming they already think at the highest level, and so they never develop. Phase 2 is creating disequilibrium. You need experiences that your current cognitive structures cannot adequately handle. This is uncomfortable. This is why most people avoid it. They choose relationships, jobs, environments that don't challenge their existing ways of thinking. They surround themselves with people who think the same way. They interpret new experiences through the lens of old structures rather than letting new experiences reshape their structures. But without disequilibrium, there's no development. Phase 3 is the actual work of restructuring. This is where you build new cognitive operations, new ways of organizing information, new patterns of reasoning. It's effortful, it's slow. It requires practice and repetition and patience with yourself as you fumble with new mental tools. You have to try to think abstractly about things you've only thought about concretely. You have to practice taking perspectives radically different from your own. You have to work on reversibility, running scenarios backwards, imagining different causal chains. This isn't something that happens automatically. You have to deliberately practice new ways of thinking, in the same way you'd practice a new skill. Phase 4 is integration. The new structures have to become automatic, operating smoothly alongside and in coordination with your existing structures. You have to be able to flexibly shift between concrete and abstract thinking, depending on what the situation requires. You have to be able to access formal operations under stress, not just when you're calm and comfortable. This phase takes time, takes consistent application of the new structures in varied contexts until they become part of your natural cognitive repertoire. There have been individuals throughout history who exemplified different levels of cognitive development, and comparing them illuminates what's possible. Consider someone operating primarily at concrete operational levels. They can be extremely successful in stable environments with clear rules and procedures. They excel at execution, at managing known problems, at optimizing existing systems. But when the environment shifts, when new types of problems emerge, when abstract thinking becomes necessary, they're lost. Now consider someone operating at formal operational levels. They can navigate complexity, ambiguity, change. They can see patterns others miss, predict outcomes others don't anticipate, generate novel solutions to novel problems. But here's what most people don't realize. Even formal operational thinking has limits. Piaget himself hinted at a fifth stage he never fully developed, sometimes called post-formal or dialectical thinking. This is the capacity to hold contradictions, to reason across fundamentally different paradigms, to recognize that even your formal operational structures are constructions, not absolute truths. Very few people develop this capacity, but those who do operate at a level that seems almost magical to everyone else. They see the ambushes coming not just before they hit, but before they're even set up. The contrast becomes stark when you look at failure cases. There are countless examples of intelligent, educated, well-meaning people who walked straight into predictable disasters because their cognitive development couldn't process the warnings. The financial experts who couldn't see the 2008 crisis coming because they were thinking concretely about individual mortgage instruments instead of abstractly about systemic risk. The relationship partners who couldn't see the inevitable breakdown coming because they were thinking in pre-operational terms about isolated incidents instead of formal operational terms about patterns and principles. The political leaders who couldn't anticipate social movements because they were locked in concrete, thinking about traditional power structures instead of abstract thinking about shifting values and changing demographics. These weren't stupid people. They weren't lazy or careless. They were operating with cognitive structures inadequate to the complexity of the situations they were trying to navigate. The ambushes weren't ambushes to people thinking at higher developmental levels. They were obvious, predictable, avoidable, but from inside a limited cognitive structure they were genuinely invisible until impact. And this brings us back to you. Back to that sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize too late that you should have seen it coming. Back to that frustration of repeating the same patterns. Back to that exhaustion of trying so hard and still getting ambushed. Here's what Jean Piaget's work gives you. A map. A way of understanding not just what you're thinking, but how you're thinking. A framework for recognizing when you're operating with cognitive structures inadequate to the problems you're facing. And most importantly, a path forward. Because cognitive development doesn't stop at 11 or 12 or 25. Your brain maintains neuroplasticity throughout your life. You can build new structures. You can develop new ways of thinking. You can learn to see the ambushes coming. That farm boy who predicted the ambush? Piaget followed up with him years later. By adolescence, he had developed formal operational thinking. He could articulate the abstract principles of predator behavior, could reason hypothetically about different scenarios, could think about his own earlier thinking and recognize its limitations. The capacity that had seemed magical, that correct prediction based on faulty logic, had transformed into genuine understanding. He had developed the cognitive structures to consistently reason well, not just occasionally get lucky. And that same development is available to you. Think about the last major ambush you took. Not the small daily frustrations, but the big one. The relationship that blindsided you. The career disaster you didn't see building. The financial crisis that seemed to come out of nowhere. Now, with what you've learned today, ask yourself, what cognitive structure was I operating with? Was I thinking egocentrically, unable to take the other person's perspective? Was I centrating, focusing on one dimension and ignoring others? Was I thinking concretely, applying rigid rules to a situation that required abstract understanding? Was I unable to think hypothetically, to mentally simulate different scenarios and their outcomes? The ambush probably wasn't an ambush at all. It was a predictable outcome that your cognitive structures couldn't process, and that's simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it means you have more control and therefore more responsibility than you might want. Liberating because it means you're not a victim of circumstance or bad luck. You have the power to develop the cognitive structures that will let you navigate complexity you currently can't even perceive. The journey from pre-operational to concrete to formal operational thinking in any domain of your life takes time and effort and discomfort. But here's what makes it possible. You already have the neurological capacity. Your brain can do this. The structures just haven't been built yet. And every time you practice thinking abstractly about something you've only thought about concretely, you're building those structures. Every time you deliberately take a perspective radically different from your own, you're developing beyond egocentrism. Every time you hold multiple dimensions of a problem in mind simultaneously instead of centering on one, you're expanding your capacity. Every time you reason backwards from an outcome to understand the causal chain, you're developing reversibility. Every time you think about your own thinking, examining and questioning your cognitive processes, you're engaging in metacognition that accelerates all other development. And here's the beautiful part that Piaget discovered, but that gets lost in academic discussions. Cognitive development isn't just about thinking better. It's about living better. It's about relationships that don't implode because you can finally take your partner's perspective genuinely, not just performatively. It's about careers that don't stall because you can see the abstract patterns in your industry and position yourself strategically. It's about financial security because you can think systematically about money instead of just reactively managing crises. It's about emotional well-being because you can examine your own thought patterns and recognize when they're not serving you. It's about finally feeling like you're navigating life instead of being battered by it. You're at a choice point right now. You can close this video and go back to your life, back to your existing cognitive structures, back to waiting for the next ambush. Or you can make the decision that from this moment forward, you're going to pay attention to how you think, not just what you think. You're going to notice when you're operating with limitations. You're going to seek out the disequilibrium that forces growth. You're going to deliberately practice new ways of thinking until they become natural. You're going to develop the cognitive structures that transform you from someone who gets ambushed to someone who sees threats and opportunities long before others do. And here's the thing about that journey. You don't have to walk it alone. This isn't some isolated individual struggle where you figure it all out by yourself or fail. There's a community of people right here who are on the same path, who are working on the same development, who are discovering the same truths about their thinking that you're discovering about yours. Every week, we dive deep into another aspect of cognitive development, another dimension of how your mind works and how it can work better. We explore the research, the case studies, the practical applications. We create the kind of rich, challenging content that provides exactly the disequilibrium you need for growth. Not comfortable content that confirms what you already believe, but genuinely developmental content that stretches your cognitive structures. If what you've learned today resonates with you, if you felt that recognition of your own cognitive limitations and the possibility of development, then continue this journey with us. The button is right there on your screen, and clicking it is more than just a subscription. It's a statement of intention. It's you saying, I'm ready to see what I haven't been able to see. I'm ready to think in ways I haven't been able to think. I'm ready to develop beyond my current limitations. Every video we create is designed with the same care and depth as this one, building systematically on Jean Piaget's insights and the insights of dozens of other developmental theorists, giving you the tools to finally predict the ambushes instead of taking them. Join us. Click that button. Let's discover together what you're capable of when you develop the cognitive structures you were always meant to have. And if you want to go even deeper into how pre-operational thinking shows up in adult relationships, how concrete operational thinking limits your career advancement, and how to deliberately practice formal operational thinking in domains where you're currently stuck, that video is waiting for you right there. It's the natural next step in your developmental journey. The title will catch your eye because it addresses the specific cognitive limitation that's probably costing you the most right now. Go watch it. Your future self, the one who sees clearly and navigates skillfully and doesn't get ambushed anymore, is waiting for you on the other side of that click.